All right, let's get started here on the Panther-Lair Show for this week. Welcome in everybody who's watching on the live stream here on YouTube on Tuesday night. We appreciate it. Welcome in everyone who's listening to the podcast later on in the week whenever this comes to you. We appreciate that as well. You can get it on Apple Music or Apple iTunes. You can get it on Podbean, Libsyn, trying to get Spotify. We haven't been able to master that yet. I thought I had set it up to go to Spotify, but every time I go and look at Spotify or anytime anyone else tries to look on Spotify, they tell me that they can't find it. So I apologize for that. If you're into Spotify for your podcast, we can probably find a broader audience there, but as of yet, we've been unable to make that work. So I apologize if you would prefer it to be there. We're trying. And if I ever actually get it figured out, then I'll tell you. We'll celebrate it, and people can listen to it there. But we appreciate everyone tuning in. Of course, we do this live stream here on Tuesday nights. If you listen to the podcast later in the week, you should really try and make a point to hang out on Tuesday nights, 8:30 to whenever, usually about an hour or so, however long this podcast goes. We get together and do it as a live stream. You don't, yes, you get to watch me talk. That's not really the exciting part. You get to watch this slideshow of spring camp that we put on the screen and see some of the headlines from Panther-Lair.com. But we also get to interact. We get to have a little bit of a conversation. I would say that this is this is the fun part of doing a live stream. This is why we started doing a live stream, is to have comments. There is a comment section, it's sort of a chat area during the live stream, and we can interact. And so I might talk for a little bit, and then you can post your comments or questions. We can have a conversation, and I think that's what we tend to do. We tend to fire up the podcast. I talk for a little bit, and then we get into the comments, and we have some good discussion. We got regulars who show up every week, and we appreciate that. Hello to everyone out there who's already in, and we look forward to hearing from more of you. As the night goes on. There's not much to say other than it's just been a really sobering week. Last Tuesday we were talking about spring football. That was sort of the focus, whether it was here on the Panther-Lair podcast or Saturday mornings, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. on the Fan, on 93.7 The Fan in Pittsburgh. We do the Panthers Insider Show. I talked a lot about it then too. Just about what would happen if there was spring football. What would that look like, and how that was sort of headed? Because last Tuesday night, that was sort of the big story, was that the Ivy League was going to announce they were canceling fall sports with the potential to move them to the spring. They weren't guaranteeing a spring football schedule, but that was if football was going to happen for this coming season, it was going to happen in the spring, or it's going to happen in the spring in the Ivy League if they do end up playing. And so that hadn't been officially announced yet. It had just been reported, I think, on Monday. The Ivy League didn't actually announce it till Wednesday, but we talked about it a lot. We talked about what that could mean for Pitt if they were to play a season in the spring, and how the NFL guys, the NFL prospects probably wouldn't participate, although there might be some upside for them in terms of improving their draft standing. It'd be unlikely that they would actually go out and play. You would expect those guys to sit it out, and it would make matters very complicated. And then in the 7 days since then, we're sitting here on Tuesday, so it doesn't exactly feel like all hell is breaking loose again. But there was a while there, particularly on Thursday and Friday, where it did feel like all hell was breaking loose. When you have the report and then the announcement about the Big Ten going to a conference-only schedule for 2020. Still expecting to play games in the fall, but it would be a conference-only schedule. And then a report that the ACC was planning on doing the same kind of thing. Although the ACC later came out and said they haven't made any decisions yet. They're not going to make any decisions for a couple weeks. And then the Pac-12, I think on Friday, announced that they're going to a conference-only schedule. And all of a sudden, it just felt like things were snowballing, and it felt like we were really moving in a certain direction. And the biggest problem is that the Big Ten's announcement, the Pac-12's announcement, if the ACC were to announce something similar, they're going to go to conference-only games. We could go a long way down the path of what that would look like. And I was on a couple different radio shows over the weekend. I talked with Andrew Filipponi on the Fan on Friday night. I talked to Chris Mack on the Fan on Sunday morning. I had my own show on Saturday on the Fan where I talked about it. We talked about the logistics of it. What would a conference-only season look like? There's reports that the ACC is considering 5 home-and-home games. And that's it. You would play 10 games. You would only play 5 opponents. You play them all 5 home and home, just as a means of trying to not necessarily limit travel, because I don't feel like travel is the big problem. All these teams charter flights, right? All these teams, their traveling procedures would very much put them in a bubble and keep them very contained and sort of, almost quarantined, right? Because they take a bus, their own bus, to the airport. They've got to go through security at some point, but you can mask up for that. And then they, like in the movies, they walk up the, they don't walk down the jetway. They go right onto the tarmac and walk up the steps into the airplane like they're movie stars from the 1940s. Or anyone flying by plane in the 1940s or 1950s. And so they're very much contained, and they're on charter flights where it's just them on the flight. You can very much control who is on that plane with the players, and you can make sure they're tested and no one's positive. There's no chance of contamination or contact there. And then even when you get to the hotel, you control most of the environment on these road trips. So I don't think it's about limiting travel. And people said that at first about canceling the non-conference games for the Big Ten and the Pac-12, and ultimately probably, we're going to head to that point with the ACC and the SEC and the Big 12. I don't think it's about limiting travel. When those conferences announced, or when they do announce that they're going to cancel their non-conference games, I don't think they're trying to they're doing it as a safety measure to avoid traveling. I don't think traveling is a problem. I think they canceled the non-conference games because and ultimately, maybe came up with this 5 home game plan, if that's what comes to pass. I think it's all about trying to maximize the amount of control you have over the factors, and the exposure that your players are going to have. If you cut it down to 10 games, you play 5 home series, you can put some space between games at different points. You have a very kind of clear idea of who you're playing against. If there is a positive case, you're able to really kind of, I think, hone in on who that player came in contact with, either on your team or the opponent's team, and I think it makes it all more manageable. And that's the stage we're in right now. We're past the stage of what can we do to have a normal football season. We're in the stage now, and we passed that stage a long time ago. We're in the stage now of how many factors can we control and manage? How much of the risk can we manage that it's an acceptable amount of risk that we can still get some games played? And I think it's been sobering for the last week, and particularly the last 4 or 5 days, because the more you read, the more quotes you see, and the more people you talk to, there's an inevitable conclusion here. And we're barreling down that road, sometimes faster than others. And certainly on Thursday and Friday, I felt like we were barreling down that road faster. But I couldn't help, when I saw the news about the Big Ten, I saw the news about the Pac-12, and the report about the ACC, I couldn't help just feeling like this is just the next step. This is just one of many next steps. This is not the final step. Because if you ask me right now, I'm not alone on this. I'm not breaking ground. They're not going to put up a headline that, guy from Rivals says this. But are they playing this year? Really? I have a hard time seeing it. And there was a point, and it seems like it was a long time ago, but it was probably a month or two ago, where it was far easier for me to imagine a way they would pull off the season than it was for me to imagine them canceling the season outright. That's flipped completely. It's far easier for me to imagine them canceling the season. It's not easy for me to imagine what it's going to be like to have a fall with no college football and no pit games to cover. That is difficult for me to process, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around what that's going to be like. But it's far easier for me to imagine them just not having a season at all and not playing this fall than it is for me to imagine them actually coming up with something that works. Whether it's a 10-game conference-only 5 home opponent schedule, whether it's even smaller than that, you play just 8 games, you play just within your division. I don't know what they end up doing. You can't go in a bubble. You can't do what the NBA and the NHL are doing. You can't do that. You're going to be far more. You're going to be far closer to the Major League Baseball and really the NFL schedule or the NFL approach than you are than you have the ability to even get close to the NBA or NHL models. And I think we're even seeing vulnerabilities and weaknesses in those NBA and NHL models. Now, I mean, they just started, so I mean, you have to iron it out a little bit. But I mean, you got guys leaving the bubble in the NBA to get takeout delivery food. And these are paid professionals, presumably adults. And they're leaving the bubble to go get delivery food. You're going to have 100 football players, college football players, living in Oakland. You can't even keep an NBA player from walking across the freaking street in Disney World to get some takeout food. And you're going to have 100 college football players living in Oakland staying safe in quarantine. I don't even know if they're going to have college. And like I'm hoping that I'm just in a down cycle. You know, I mean, we've talked about cycles and up cycles and down cycles, and I'm hoping that I'm over exaggerating the situation. But as you sit here, it looks pretty GD bleak, man. It really does. And I don't mean to be a downer to start off the podcast, but it's really, really tough. It's really tough to envision it happening. Let me see here. Let's run through a few comments before we get into some different conversation topics. Dale Gribble says, Gene Steratore said on the basketball court last week, down here in Washington, PA, it's November or bust because of the NFL draft. Yeah, I mean, I guess that would be one option that could still be on the table, Dale, is a late start to the season. I mean that might be, like, I think spring football is, I just think that's a non-starter. I know I talked about it so much last week, and I really thought about it a lot. And I put so much time into considering what it could mean for Pitt and how they could move forward with it. I just think the more I've read about it, and the more I've considered the issues that come with spring football, and the more I've talked to people who might actually know some things about this, it just feels like a non-starter. It seems really, really unlikely that there's going to be any spring football. So what you need is some middle ground between the regular fall season, which is clearly not going to happen. When you've got the Big Ten and the Pac-12 already ditching the 12-game schedule and ditching the non-conference games, they're clearly not going to have none of the Power 5 conferences are going to be playing regular, full 12-game schedules. So that's off the table. But there's some there are some middle grounds between that and spring football. With those two extremes eliminated, there are options in between. And maybe like Dale says, or like he says that Gene Steratore says, maybe it's, starting the season late. Maybe that's the best option to get these guys on the field and get games played. And there might not be any fans in the stand, and it might be really weird because of when it starts. It might not start until November or December. But boy, I mean, that might be the best option. And, I believe that these college administrators, these conference commissioners, and the leaders of college sports and college athletics, I believe they're working very hard to try and find that best option. I believe they're working very hard to try and find an answer on how to do this. And I got to think that if you could get one of these guys, a conference commissioner or a leading AD, to be honest about it, they've got a folder that's probably this thick, full of various scenarios they've worked through, maybe bigger. Because I think they're imagining and experimenting with and attempting to devise just about every plan they could possibly come up with. And one of those has to be starting late in the season, like Dale says. Maybe back as far as October or November. And I think you do have the option to sort of push it back. You shouldn't really have much in the way of facilities overlaps. You know what I mean? Even the schools like Pitt and Miami that share stadiums with pro teams shouldn't have overlap on Saturday games versus Sunday games. I mean, it's not ideal to go back-to-back like that, but it's happened many times since, Heinz Field opened, that Pitt and the Steelers, Pitt has played on Saturday and the Steelers have played on Sunday. So, I mean, that's not unprecedented. So you should have some flexibility in terms of moving the schedule. And so that's an option that can stay out there for you. Even if you get to August and you say, we're not starting the schedule on time. You get to September, you say, we're still not ready to start. You get to, late September and you're still trying to nail down testing protocols and quarantine protocols and all the different things you're going to have laid out in detail, planned down to the very minute details, you've got time to continue working those things out. And maybe you do get started in like November or something and play 8 games or 10 games. And it takes you into January. And you ditch the bowl season. You have the college football playoffs, the conference championship games in the college football playoffs if you can. I don't know. It's better than nothing, if that's what it comes down to. It's better than nothing, but it's still weird. Josh Newark says you can control college football if you eliminate the academic side of their experience and keep them in hotels outside of football only. NBA guys already breaking quarantine in their hotels. I mean, right, Josh, think about what you just said. You can control college football if you eliminate the academic side of their experience. Man, the whole thing is supposed to be about the academic side of their experience. And we're not going to pretend to, we're not going to, it's not about academics, or everybody knows it's all about athletics. Yes, we know that, but they are still in college, and like something like 90% of them are not going to go to the NFL. And college is about college, and there is still, it's unique from the NBA and the NHL and the MLB and the NFL because there is that connection to school and classes. And like, yeah, you might actually eliminate the academic side of the experience when you and keep them in hotels when you cancel all in-person classes. But if they can't have in-person classes at Pitt, they're not going to have football games at Heinz Field. Pitt is not going to have football games at Heinz Field. Maybe the Steelers do, but Pitt is not. I don't know. Anthony Scaramastro says, everything revolves around not one player testing positive. Once that happens, you must assume everyone may be affected. Well, no, see, that's the thing, Anthony. This is what they need to work on this summer, and what I'm sure they have been working on. In addition to considering all the schedule possibilities, I have to believe they've been working on trying to, figure out the procedure on how... Or I guess the response on what happens if one player does test positive. You know what I mean? Like what you do when that happens. And they have to have it laid out in a bullet point. You know what I mean? It's got to be a PowerPoint presentation. And I'm sure it's already been put together in conjunction with doctors and trainers and coaches and all this kind of stuff. That if one guy tests positive, he immediately goes into quarantine, and all the guys in his position group go into quarantine, and you're and I know you would say, well, then the whole team's going into quarantine. Well, no, because you're going to have to adjust how you practice. You're going to have to practice in smaller groups. You're going to have to practice in groups of 25 or less, or 10 or less, or something like that, to try and minimize that potential exposure if you do have a positive test. And then you instantly have to tell the other team and all the players that your player might have come in contact with. If it's a lineman, tell the other team, get all their defensive linemen tested. If it's a wide receiver, tell them, get all your corners tested, or anybody who would have come in close to this guy. All of these things need to be planned out, Anthony, so you can move forward quickly. And I think that's why having a little bit of time in between games to give you space, or I should say having a little space in between games to give you time to do the testing and establish quarantine protocols. I think that would help if you are able to space out the schedule a little bit. But I think those are the things they're working on right now. I think those are the crucial things that they're working on and they need to be working on. Michael Toop to the third about the, I talked about travel, how I don't think travel is really an issue when it comes to all of this stuff, because the teams fly charter and they can be pretty quarantined. Michael Toop to the third says, what about the conferences trying to eliminate travel of fans? Substantial number of fans at these games. Although it seems to be a goner already. And I think you're right, Michael. I mean, I'm not worried about fans traveling to games because I don't think fans are going to be allowed at games. I think fans are going to be shut out of games, whether it's home games or road games. I don't think any fans are going anywhere. So I don't think you're going to have a travel issue with fans going to these games. I don't think travel is a problem. I think it's just all about how you manage the risk and how you manage the risk factors and try to minimize the risk as much as you can. Dale Gribble says, Pat Narduzzi said that his team will need at least 6 weeks to prepare for the season. have to put that into consideration. Yeah, you're right. I think they're still doing voluntary workouts, I think Pat Narduzzi said, so they're kind of working toward that. I think, so I'm reading through the comments. Captain Cube says, you have to get me a more comfortable chair. I'm good, man. What are you talking about? I'm comfortable. This is a very comfortable chair. I sit in this chair all the time to work here in the office. No, as far as the team needing time to prepare, I mean, that's one of the advantages of pushing the start of the season back. You're going to end up with more practice time. And I think even if the season gets canceled or it gets pushed back, I think these guys are going to still find ways for the team to practice. I'm not worried about the team being prepared for the season. I think they'll have ample time for that, although the next few weeks will be interesting to see what teams do, what they're able to do as you get through August. Rich Belts says just when they're going to have their best team. And Rich, you hit on something that I'm going to write about in the 321, or at least I'm planning to write about in the 321 column this week on Panther-Lair.com. And it's something I wanted to talk about tonight that nobody wants college football to go away. I think everybody is disappointed about the prospect of there being no college football season this year. I think sports fans will be disappointed to not have college football. Certainly Pitt fans will be disappointed not to have college football because they're fans of sport, fans of the sport. But I think Pitt fans are taking it especially hard because they know that this team has a chance to really do something. And I mean, we could go back and forth about whether Pitt will ever get over the hump or have that year where everything comes together. But I mean, in terms of personnel, this team has it all set up for things to come together. It really does. I mean, you return a defense that should be one of the best in the ACC, one of the best in the country. You got a ton of personnel back from a group that was really good last year. And then on offense, you've got third-year starter at quarterback. You've got a bunch of experienced guys returning to work with an offensive coordinator for the second year, so you have some consistency in the offense. I think it's reasonable to assume and expect that the offense will get just a little bit better. And we've talked about that a million times, that they don't have to score 45 points a game for this team to win a bunch. They just have to be like 25, 28 points a game, somewhere around there. If you can get to there, you win a lot of games. You would have won 10 games last year if you could average 28 points per game, 25 points per game probably. You would have gotten over that hump. Who knows? Maybe 11. Maybe you beat Virginia. Another like a misery. I mean, all the losses last season. I don't think it's out of, I don't think it's unreasonable to say they were all a product of offensive ineptitude. Virginia, Penn State, Virginia Tech, Boston College, Miami, every single one of those, the offense, it in its own bed. And lost the game, quite frankly. I mean, I don't know how else you would put it. The defense played well enough to win in every single one of those games. Even when they lost 28-0 at Virginia Tech. Well, the defense give up like one big play? Held them to like 260 yards of offense. You only give up 260 yards of offense, you should win the game, unless your offense blows it for you, which the offense did. The offense couldn't do anything, and they actually gave Virginia Tech a touchdown. And the same thing with Virginia. Set Virginia with a bunch of short fields. I don't think Virginia drove the length of the field once all day. Penn State barely got by them. Boston College and Miami. Miami's offense was terrible, and Pitt's defense didn't give them anything. They gave up one drive at the worst point of the game, and that's on them. They played well enough to win. And Boston College, I mean, eventually they got worn down because their offense wouldn't stay on the field. Time of possession stats for Pitt weren't terrible last season as a whole, but they were in the Boston College game, and it eventually tipped the scales in favor of Boston College. They were able to get the running game going. A.J. Dillon's really good, and when they kept staying on the field and Pitt's defense was getting worn down, I mean, the inevitable happened. But again, those were games where the defense played well enough to win. The offense was just so lousy. But because the defense played well, the offense didn't need to be great to turn that around. They just needed to be a little less bad. And so I think it's reasonable to think that this offense, with all of these returning players and consistency at the coordinator position, this offense should be able to be a little less bad. Sounds like a good enough mantra. I mean, like, forget all of your, lock the gates and earn the jersey or train to go or all this. Just be a little less bad. Sounds like a winning slogan to me, because if the offense could be just a little less bad, I'm perfectly confident in this defense being really good. So if you add a really good defense and an offense that's just a little less bad, I think you get a team that is, 10-win caliber, Coastal Division winning, ACC championship game appearance, giving Clemson a game, winning 10 games, going to a good bowl. And you end up 10-4 or 11-3. That's what this team is. That's where this team should be in 2020. And if this season were happening as a normal season, as it should, that's what we would be talking about. That's what I was talking about. That's what I've talked about all offseason. You go through the spring and into the early summer, when there were still hopes of a regular season, a normal season being played. You look at what I wrote. You look at what I said on these podcasts. I said, this is where this team should be. This should be a team that wins 10, 11 games, 12 games, somewhere around there. And I know Pitt's history, and I know this and that, and all the reasons why people say it's not going to happen. And that's fine, and I might even agree with some of those things. But the reality is, where should this team be? What should this team do in 2020? That's what they should do. And I think most Pitt fans know that. They may not have a lot of confidence in it happening because of their own experience with Pitt, or how they view Pitt's history, recent history in the last 30 years, 40 years. And I understand that perspective. I understand how you could be jaded by that. But I think those same Pitt fans also acknowledge that this team should be good enough to accomplish that. This team should be good enough to have success at that level. And now they're looking at a team that should be able to play that well, that should be able to have that much success, that should be able to achieve at that level. And the damn team's not going to be able to play because the season's going to get canceled. That's rough. That's rough. That's rough to have, one of your best teams in a decade. No, your best team in a decade. One of your best teams in the last few decades, and they might not play a single game. And I got nothing for you. I can't talk you out of that. I can't talk you down from that. I can't reason with you and tell you why you shouldn't feel bad about that. You should. And I'm guessing if this season gets canceled and all these guys leave and go to the NFL, and we'll talk about that in a second. But if that's the way it goes, and only a fraction of this roster returns in 2021, we'll talk for a long, long, long time about what might have been in 2020. Because who knows what it would have turned into. But they've got the potential to be that special team where everything comes together, where all the cards line up, all the stars align. Let's check the comments here, see what people are saying on YouTube, and really appreciate everybody who is chiming in here on the YouTube comments. We appreciate everybody. Let me look here. Royce Beacom. Let me see. Yeah, Royce Beacom says maybe they should poll the players about who's willing to play in the spring and still prep for the NFL draft. I mean, I think the answer is going to be very few. And I think the more guys you get who would say, no, I'm leaving, whether it's seniors or draft-eligible underclassmen, I think you would see it start filtering down to other guys on the team, guys who have remaining eligibility who say, Coach, I'll just take a red shirt. I'm not going to play this year and play 10 games in the spring or 8 games in the spring or whatever it is, and then turn around in 2-3 months and get right back into training camp. I'm not going to do it. I'll just take a red shirt too. I just don't think it's going to happen. Josh Newark asks if the NFL is going to cancel their season or push their season around. I don't think so. I think the NFL will find a way to play. They have professional athletes who are, in a collective bargaining agreement, and it's a different situation. You're not talking about college kids, amateur athletes, and it's just such a different situation. I think the NFL I mean, they have half the players to account for on each team, and they only have 32 teams as opposed to 120 or whatever it is, or even 60 some. So they have twice as many teams in the Power 5 as they have in the NFL, and they've got twice as many players. So you're looking at, or twice as many players on each of the teams. So you're looking at 4 times the amount of players to deal with in college as opposed to the NFL. I think the NFL can at least convince themselves now that they'll find a way to make it work far more than college will be able to. Royce Beacom says Pitt versus Miami of Ohio in January or February. Who's going to show up? Or even a conference-only season in the spring. Would you scrap the bowl schedule for the NFL draft? Yeah, I mean, there's a million questions, Royce, about what a spring football season would look like. I mean, Miami of Ohio for me is a non-starter. I think the ACC is going to cancel their non-conference games. That'll be the first step, and it'll build from there. I think, if they were even going to try to have a spring season, it would be conference only. I just don't even know if, like I say, I don't even know if that's going to happen. Dale Gribble says he's 32. He hasn't missed a home game since he was 20, and it'll feel weird not sitting up in the upper deck by himself if the games are canceled. Yeah, I'm sorry, Dale. This might have to be one you tell your grandkids about. Josh Newark brings up a point that I wanted to get to. Even if we get a canceled season, I'm not doom and gloom about a severe drop-off in 2021, he says. He says even losing Twyman, Ford, Jones, I would assume current seniors would get an extra year. So this is what's interesting. So, I mean, if the NCAA, or not the NCAA, if these conferences end up canceling their seasons, I would expect the NCAA will come through with they'll grant an eligibility exemption for the seniors and guys who are out of eligibility, kind of like they did with the spring sports. I think they'll give them an extra year of eligibility. But I don't think that's a guarantee that you return a whole bunch of the roster. What you saw in the spring, and I haven't seen what the final numbers have ended up looking like, but they said, yeah, everybody can come back. The NCAA said, we'll give you an extra year of eligibility. If your spring season got canceled this year, we'll give you an extra, and you're a senior, we'll give you an extra year of eligibility. You can come back. But I think what happened was a whole bunch of the seniors, on baseball or softball or, wherever else plays in the spring, weren't really planning their futures around playing another season of college sports. They were going through the spring semester, looking ahead to the summer and potentially the fall, probably with, internships, job opportunities, those kinds of things lined up, ready to graduate, ready to move on. Now, football may or may not be in the same kind of boat, but the other element is the NCAA said you could have an extra year of eligibility. The colleges didn't say, we guarantee you're going to get a scholarship. So getting an extra year of eligibility is one thing. Getting on scholarship for another year is another thing. Even if the NCAA raised the limits and said, football, you can have 95 scholarships or 105 scholarships instead of 85 scholarships this year. It's a serious financial commitment for the university to then say, all right, we're going to honor it for these 20 seniors who all want to come back. They're already going to be in some financial trouble, particularly if the season ends. I mean, okay, they're already experiencing financial hardships now just based on the loss of March Madness. And this isn't just about Pitt. This is about college athletic departments, FBS athletic departments. They're already experiencing financial hardships from that. You cancel the college football season, you're cutting down on the cash flow even more. And then to turn around and say, all right, come up with another 15 scholarships or another 20 scholarships. I don't know if schools are going to be able to take all these guys back. Now, I did a quick little list before the show started of who I expect Pitt to lose after this season, whether it's played or not. And it's pretty much, and I'm just talking about starters. And it's seniors plus Jalen Twyman and Paris Ford, basically is what it boils down to. And on offense, I got Kenny Pickett, Jimmy Morrissey, Bryce Hargrove, Lucas Krull, Taysir Mack, and A.J. Davis. That's 6 guys that I projected starters who won't be back after this season. And then on defense, Rashad Weaver, Patrick Jones, Keyshawn Camp, Jalen Twyman, Phil Campbell, Chase Pine, Jason Pinnock, Damari Mathis, DeMar Hamlin, and Paris Ford. That's 10. 10 defensive starters. Everybody except Cam Bright, basically. 16 total between the offense and the defense. Now, some of those guys potentially could come back. If Pitt wants to use the scholarship funds for them, and the NCAA raises the scholarship limit, you're allowed to have more than 85 for a year, and they give them an extra year of eligibility and all of that. But, Pitt didn't guarantee to the spring sports student athletes that they would have a scholarship if they wanted to come back. The NCAA said you can go back, you've got that extra year of eligibility, but Pitt and a lot of schools said, okay, but we'll talk about this. We're not going to guarantee that you just automatically get this extra scholarship, this extra year. I have to think football will be the same way, because some of those other sports you can deal with partial scholarships. Baseball or softball, you can deal in partial scholarships. So you might not necessarily, even if you could give them some money, you don't have to give them all the money. Football, they aren't partial scholarships. You don't have that option in football. So I don't know if any of them would come back. To be honest, if this season doesn't happen, I think they might all go. I mean, I'm sure Pat Narduzzi would love to get these guys back. I don't know if Pitt's going to be able to afford it. I don't know if Pitt's going to be able or willing to pay. And I mean, this is just me sitting here on a Tuesday night in the palatial Panther-Lair podcast studios, talking to you guys on YouTube and on the podcast as you listen to it through the week. I'm not, sitting next to Heather Like and whoever else here, and they're whispering in my ear saying, we're not paying for that. This is just my guess. That's a boatload of money that I just don't see Pitt coming up with. And so I don't see any of these guys coming back. So you're going into a season in 2021 with 6 starters returning on offense and defense combined, 1 starter on defense, 5 on offense. You're losing your quarterback. You're losing your best players on defense. You're losing your best offensive lineman. And I think this is part of it. Kind of tying back to what I said earlier. I think this is part of what depresses Pitt fans. This is what brings them down. It's not just the prospect of losing the sport of college football. It's losing the sport of college football in a year when Pitt should be really good. It's hard. It's hard. I don't, like I say, there are a lot of times when things aren't going great and I'll at least try sort of rationalize, you know what I mean? And talk around it and be like, okay, I know this isn't good, guys, but listen, think about it this way. There's no other way to think about this. If this all goes down, if the season gets canceled, there's no other way to think about it. There's no 2 ways around it. Let's see. Now, I will say, as I think about 2021, as I think about, even if they don't have all those guys back, even if they end up with, only six returning starters, I don't think, and I'm guessing the fans would say this too, I don't think there's going to be much appetite for excuses. If they go out, if a season gets canceled, they lose all these guys, and they come back in 2021, I think the expectation is going to be, all right, Pat Narduzzi, rough, tough break on 2020, but you still need to win games. You need to win a bunch of games in 2021 because you've recruited this team, you've developed this team. These are your guys. You need to go out and compete for the Coastal and try and get back to Charlotte. I had that written down as a topic I wanted to talk about how the expectations would still be high. I'm going to write about it in the 321 column this Friday, but geez, that feels a long way off. The 2021 season is 14 months away. I don't know. Let's see if we got any other comments here in the section here on YouTube. We do appreciate everybody who comes in on Tuesday nights at 8:30. It's always fun to have the interaction and the conversation. we wish there were more interesting things to talk about than the depressing prospect of no college football season. But, we'll keep doing the podcast throughout the summer, of course, and throughout the fall and winter. We'll always find things to talk about. There's always recruiting to talk about, and there's always topics to discuss when it comes to Pitt sports, of course. And so that's why we, continue the podcast. 8:30 on Tuesday nights is where we can interact and have a little conversation. We go back and forth. Got some of the regulars in here tonight, and we appreciate that. If you listen to the podcast and you ever find yourself talking back to your headphones or whatever it is, this is your chance to actually have that conversation. We also have on Fridays the Conversation podcast, which last week we had Ron Idoko, who was a really interesting guy. He's actually working with Pitt's Office of Diversity and Inclusion and doing some really interesting things there. He's a former Pitt football player. He played in the mid-2000s and came with Walt Harris as the head coach. He was a walk-on and eventually went on scholarship, and then played with Dave Wanstead and bounced around, played some indoor football, and now he's ended up working in administration at Pitt, actually in the university, not even the athletic department. He's working in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion with the university. And it was a really interesting conversation about, his role and what that means and what the Office of Diversity and Inclusion does at Pitt, but also about student athletes. He doesn't work specifically for the athletic department, but he's involved with student athletes. There's no question about it. That's part of his job. And it's a really unique time for student athletes right now. Particularly in prominent sports like football and basketball, because more and more, and I don't think this just started, but I think it really picked up a lot this year, and particularly in the last few months, college student athletes sort of finding their voice and realizing that they have a voice that can have impact and make an impact on the world around them, on society, and really affect social change. And it's I think it's really interesting to watch. And there are times when I think it might be misguided. There are times when I think they're not representing themselves or the issues that are important to them as well as they could. But some of that is due to youth. But it's interesting to see these guys sort of take control a little bit and put themselves in the spotlight and say, hey, you like watching me catch touchdown passes. You like watching me throw touchdowns or make big tackles every Saturday. That's only 12 days out of the year. The other 353, I have something to say then too. And I want you to pay attention to me then too. And it's been really interesting to watch. And Ron and I had a really interesting conversation about that. So check that out. We've had some I think really interesting conversations on that Friday podcast over the past few months, I guess, that we've been doing it. So go and check those out. If you subscribe to the podcast, those should be right there available for you. It's every Friday, a conversation with whoever it is that week. This week, I always say I don't tease it ahead of time because I don't like to promote something I don't actually have yet. So, we haven't taped this week's conversation podcast yet, but I think I'm going to go off course a little bit. Hopefully, I've got some ideas in mind on some people to talk to that I think would be pretty interesting to hear from. We actually have to lock that up, but it's a little bit different from some of the stuff we've been doing in recent weeks. So hopefully you get a chance to check that out. Of course, on Saturday mornings, we have the Panthers Insider Show on 93.7 The Fan. That's 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. on The Fan. That's fun. We kind of take this podcast and some of the topics we discuss here and take it to the radio airwaves. Let the general public, not just the Pitt fans that frequent Panther-Lair.com. It's everybody gets to tune in for the Pitt talk there on The Fan from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. So check that out. And then, of course, there's the website. Should probably talk about that, right? I haven't mentioned that yet. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You can find it all at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, we have message boards where a lot of these conversations we're having here on the podcast start as message board threads. I read the board every day. I interact on the board every day. And a lot of the conversations we have there kind of inspire, influence what I'm thinking about. Maybe not my opinions, but my topics, or maybe not my opinions, but the topics that we get to here on the podcast or on the 321 column. You can find them, sort of the genesis of those things, on the Panther-Lair.com message board. So check that out, Panther-Lair.com. And, people keep saying, well, there's nothing going on in sports. And that's true. There aren't really games being played. I mean, we're getting closer to it, maybe, in the NBA and the NHL and Major League Baseball. But there's always college recruiting. And that's the thing that's still happening. That's the thing that hasn't gone away, is college recruiting. And so we've always got something to cover, something to write about, news to report on when it comes to recruiting. So if you're jonesing for sports coverage, for something actually happening in sports, recruiting content is right out there for you at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. A little bit shorter here on the Panther-Lair podcast tonight, but that's how it goes sometimes. I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about again next week. So thanks to everybody for tuning in on Tuesday night here on the live stream. Thanks to everybody who listened to the podcast. Make sure you check out that Conversation podcast on Friday, the Panthers Insider Show on Saturday, and then, of course, the website throughout the week, Panther-Lair.com. Have a great week, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy. Hope everyone around you is safe and healthy. Have as much fun as you can, but do it in a safe way. We'll see you on the message boards, and we will talk to you again next Tuesday night at 8:30 right here for the Panther-Lair Show. Dear God.